The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 were heard around the world as a symbol of brave protest, but also of cruel government response. Leading figures, such as the Tank Man, became symbols of rebellion throughout China. Yet, in the midst of it all, there was one man who rooted on the Tiananmen students and became the voice of Chinese protest. And though he had a major debut at Tiananmen, his history and influence extends far beyond that particular event, soon becoming widely regarded as the godfather of Chinese rock and roll. He was a Chinese guitarist who used music to empower his audience, while compromising with Chinese censorship policy. During the rise of communism in China, he used rock music to convey the urgency of freedom of expression to Chinese society, while avoiding conflict with the Chinese government. This is the story of Cui Jian, the Tiananmen singer and voice of Chinese protest, which remains untold to the world. Cui Jian was born and raised under the rule of Mao Zedong and lived under an oppressive communist government. With his parents both involved in the music industry, Cui was taught trumpet by his father at a young age. Passionate for expression through music, he aspired to be a musician.
My generation is like born in the early 60s, or a few years earlier. We were the first generation, create.
From there, he began to teach himself to play guitar by playing songs from the Rolling Stones and Beatles. Cui Jian's songs were bold and passionate, but at the same time, vague and interpretive. To some, Nothing to My Name was a cry of rebellion, but it was also too vague to pinpoint as anti-communist propaganda.
Someone will say it's another meaning behind the love song, like political meanings. I don't want to say that really clearly because I don't have to, because sometimes I feel the politics and the love in some way is all one point is the same, is hate and love.
Cui Jian was at the height of his career when conflict broke out in Tiananmen Square. It was April of 1989, and Chinese students rallied there to protest for the democratic reform of the Chinese Communist Party. The People's Liberation Army was also ordered to non-violently clear Tiananmen Square, but students blockaded the area. For the rest of the month, it remained a stalemate between students and government forces as the government struggled to regain the area. But for Cui Jian, this was his time to shine. When Cui arrived at the scene, the students recognized him. The crowds were thrilled to receive him.
If you were there, it felt like a big party. There was no fear.
On a makeshift stage, Cui Jian performed songs such as Nothing to My Name. He wrapped a red blindfold over his eyes as a symbol of the cause, perhaps to convey the restrictive nature of the communist government. He played at Tiananmen Square for over 2 weeks, egging on the student protesters before the crackdown occurred.
I covered my eyes with a red cloth to symbolize my feelings. The students were heroes. They needed me, and I needed them.
Nothing to My Name soon became the unofficial anthem of the protest. and the students cheered him on as he performed. Nobody expected or was prepared for, however, the massacre that would happen days later in the square. When Cui Jian left Tiananmen by June 4th, troops from the 27th Army Group cracked down on hundreds of civilians. The event became a devastating moment in history. Cui's legacy, however, still remained. Cui still continued to perform in public venues years later, but in 1990, he was on stage in a song Balls Under a Red Flag, wearing peasant clothes and a red blindfold as an homage to the Tiananmen Square event. The symbolism was obvious, and Cui Jian's performance was halted and removed. He was told that he would be banned from performing at large venues for the next decade. On top of that, Cui decided to quit his performance on Chinese television at perhaps the largest festival of the year, on Chinese New Year, after being told by organizers that he was prohibited from playing what they thought to be politically sensitive content. Yet despite Cui's clashes with the government, his career did not stop there. By compromising and sending a vaguer message, he continued to perform in China and other places and overseas, as well as in large-scale venues when the bans were relaxed.
I played in some small club in the past 20 years. Every year I have to play at least 2 or 3. But I cannot play in a bigger stadium for 10 years, for 12 years. Every year we try to have a concert in Beijing. But every time it's the same. We almost get the permission, and then we have a problem.
Cui Jian compromised with the government by lessening the political undertone in his songs, but he refused to give up their interpretive meanings. His influence on the Chinese people, however, could not match that of his earlier years, leading up to Tiananmen. His conflicts with the Chinese government lost him the freedom of expression that he so desired, one that no compromise could restore. Many have followed Cui Jian's precedent. Ai Weiwei, a famous film and visual artist, produced several music videos criticizing Chinese censorship. Cui also achieved one of his biggest dreams, playing with the Rolling Stones in a Beijing 2006 concert. For the first time, Chinese rock and Cui's legacy spread across the world. Cui Jian is past his prime, but as the godfather of Chinese rock, his work is not forgotten. There is a lot to be learned from Cui Jian's life. Perhaps his plight with the government was inevitable, but also, perhaps it caused him to become the revered godfather of Chinese rock that he is today. Not only did he influence Chinese society by introducing a new aspect of Western culture, but he also inspired many others to find a voice as well. Ultimately, Cui Jian's conflict and compromise with the government shaped and, in a way, epitomized Chinese history. Like the student protesters at Tiananmen, he gained support and fame from voicing complaints and raising conflict with the Chinese government. But ultimately, he was forced to either compromise and be more favorable toward the government, or, like the military crackdown at Tiananmen, be censored and subdued. In this way, because Cui Jian refused to compromise with Chinese censorship policy, the implicit political messages that led to Cui Jian's rise in fame also led to his ultimate decline.